Welcome to the Holy Post. Research is finding that many Americans are opposed to the gospel because they view Christians as hypocrites. But a new $100 million ad campaign is hoping to reintroduce Jesus to the country. But does Jesus really have a PR problem? Or does the church have a discipleship problem? Then culture war issues are fracturing evangelical colleges into 5 distinct groups. What does it mean for the future of the church? Then Phil talks to our friend, pastor and podcaster Mike Erre about how to think biblically about the culture wars. Does the New Testament really call the church to have power over the culture? Mike shares his 3 principles for Christians and the culture war. All of that, plus the Dutch are giving guns to robots. What could possibly go wrong? Here is episode 532.
Hey there, this is Phil Vischer. Welcome back to the Holy Post podcast. I'm here with Caitlin Shess. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Phil.
And Sky Jitani. Hi, Sky.
Hi, everyone.
Sky has internet issues, but we're trying not to be annoyed by it.
I'm annoyed by it.
Yeah, you should be. Yeah, and you haven't fixed
just so
it,
everyone knows,
so you're annoying us.
I have tried 2 different internet providers, and they both stink. They tore up my backyard last year to put in fiber optic, which is still not hooked up to the neighborhood, even though it's there. So I'm just suffering.
Suffering in not silence. And now it's time for the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Caitlin.
Okay, let's go back to the Department of What Could Possibly Go Wrong, shall we? We haven't been to that department in a while. The Netherlands has deployed NATO's first killer robot ground vehicles.
Oh, my word.
That's
like
exciting.
the Transformers?
Yeah, they don't transform. They just kill you. The Netherlands has deployed 4 armed ground robots, or unmanned ground vehicles, making it the first NATO country to do so. The robots are tracked hybrid modular infantry systems, or THEMIS.
That
Themis.
doesn't sound terrible.
Here comes THEMIS.
Sounds like an evil supervillain name.
I know. They're built by an Estonian defense company,
That could be
Milrem
good.
Robotics.
It's not called Skynet?
No, it's not called Skynet, and
That's
not called
the Terminator.
Tesla either. Yeah, it has treads like a tank and can use a variety of weapons. Photos provided by the Dutch military show their UGVs, that's unmanned ground vehicle, outfitted with machine guns.
Oh.
Fun.
So we should be afraid of the Dutch?
Upside. There's an upside. I've been worried about the Dutch for years. Okay, so here's the upside. Tell me whether the upside outweighs the downside.
No.
Or not. Caitlin, wait until I tell you
making a
what
prediction
the
that no.
What if this means we're headed towards a day where wars are fought entirely by robots and people don't have to show up?
Nope.
It'd be like Robot Wars on TV. Whoever's robots are the last standing, you get Poland. I don't know. That you get whatever it was. Do you think we would ever do that, or will people always run out and get in the way?
There's no way this ends well. No.
Isn't the point, whether you're talking about drones, like aerial drones, or these robotic truck tank things, the point's still to kill people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unless your drone gets out in front of the people and their drone has to get through your drone. So wouldn't you want a drone defense rather than sending, our sons and daughters out to stand in the way of the other side's drones? Caitlin, I'm making sense.
No, you're not. We already have a lot of remote technology that not only kills actual human beings, but causes a lot of really messy moral questions and a lot of trauma for people who thousands of miles away cause the deaths of other people. I don't think we need to go any further down that road.
Well, that raises the question, we've had drone technology for a while where a vehicle is being remotely controlled by a human operator, and then that human operator decides to launch the missile or drop the bomb, whatever it might be. But are these things totally independent? Like there's no remote control human operator?
I don't think they're meant to be autonomous yet.
But they're robotic.
That's no.
Not until the hackers get a hold of them.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
so you're not comfortable with that. How about this? Oakland, California cops hope to arm robots with lethal shotguns.
Absolutely not.
So, but this isn't in a war. This is just in your neighborhood. Does that make it better or worse?
So much worse.
What do they plan to use them for?
In a series of little-noted Zoom meetings this fall, the city of Oakland, California, grappled with a question whose consequences could shape the future of American policing. Should cops be able to kill people with shotgun-armed robots? That age-old question. The back and forth between the Oakland Police Department and a civilian oversight body concluded with the police relinquishing their push for official language that would have allowed them to kill humans with robots under certain circumstances.
Doesn't it feel a little bit like, oh, we got this cool new toy we really want to use, and will mommy and daddy let us?
But okay, you've got an active shooter situation, and he's got the police pinned down. Don't you want to have a robot drive out and shoot him with birdshot? See, that's the situation they were thinking about. That situation right there.
The fact that we're at the point where we're debating about police having robotic shotgun-armed robots rather than having meaningful conversation about real gun reform in this country shows you how screwy things have gotten.
Do you think, what if it came down to one or another? Which would America choose? To have their neighborhoods patrolled by robots that are pointing guns at them, or to have fewer gun rights?
The robots.
Yeah. Especially when it's other people's neighborhoods.
Yeah. They actually need these robots over there.
Well, I know this is a wild question and you're being silly, but seriously, the idea that all of the tools available at our disposal just means we have more options is not how it ever ends up actually working. When you have the most destructive possible tool available, it's like the whole, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Right. The more options you have don't give you more options. They often narrow your options. So if you have robots with guns that you think are only for active shooter situations, suddenly you find other situations where you should use the robot with a gun. And now you have more robots with guns in communities that don't need them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The only thing that stops a robot with a gun is a good guy with a gun. What stops
another
a robot with a gun?
No.
Another robot with a gun.
No.
I need to have a robot with a gun because you got a robot with a gun first.
Right.
See, yeah, that's...
It's the robot gun arms race. Imagine how that would change the NRA, like the conventions. It's not just which gun do you have, but which robot is holding your gun. And is it camo? Is it a camo robot, or is it the pink Barbie model?
The fembots.
Oh, my.
For those who remember Austin Powers.
Fascinating. Hey, what do you think, folks? Are we excited about a technological utopian future where the robots are armed? I sure am. I have never seen that go poorly in a movie. How about if we look at the church in America today? Wouldn't you say that the primary problem is bad PR? And if we had better PR, I think we'd be in better shape.
Caitlin, you sound so convinced.
No,
$100 million ad campaign wants to fix Jesus' image. A major ad campaign for Jesus will expand in the months leading up to the Super Bowl. The He Gets Us campaign hopes to rescue the message of Jesus from the misdeeds of Christians. Okay, so Caitlin, don't jump in yet. Don't pass your judgment yet. Just keep it there in your hand, like the trump card you're going to play. John Lee is one of the chief architects of the He Gets Us campaign, a $100 million effort to redeem Jesus' brand. We have to redeem Jesus' brand. I can't believe we're saying that out loud. From the damage done by his followers, especially those who say one thing and then do another. Okay. So there's truth in that. Christians can be hypocrites, and that can turn people off to Jesus. So what Jesus needs is better advertising.
Ooh.
Is that working for you, Caitlin?
No.
Launched earlier this year, ads featuring black and white online videos about Jesus as a rebel, an activist, or the host of a dinner party have been viewed more than
True.
300 million times, according to organizers. 300 million views. That's a lot. That's yeah. The campaign is funded by a Christian foundation in Kansas and will expand in the next few months, all leading up to a Super Bowl ad. That's going to change everything when Jesus has his own Super Bowl ad to redeem his bespoiled and besmirched brand.
Do you remember when Mel Gibson's movie The Passion of the Christ came out?
Yes.
What year was that? Anyone remember? 2000? 2001? Someone look it up.
It was after Jonah, and Jonah was 2002. So maybe four. I'm going to say four.
That sounds about right.
4, 5, or 6.
That sounds right. And I remember sitting in the sanctuary at Willow Creek for.
I was there too.
Ooh.
Were you?
Yeah,
maybe
not for the same screening, but I was.
No. I wasn't there for a screening. I was there for like a pastor's event.
Oh.
And there was a big push, a big advertisement for the Passion of the Christ, and it was presented as, I think they used the word perhaps in front of it, but it was perhaps the greatest outreach opportunity in 2,000 years. That's how it was presented.
A bold
it was
claim.
It was a bold claim. Not like
strong statement.
Pentecost doesn't really count, but anyway, the whole push was.
Well, it said perhaps.
Right. The whole push was, hey, pastors, rent out theaters, get your churches to go, invite friends, neighbors, people who don't come to church. And if they go to this movie and you preach about this movie and you build classes and stuff around this movie, then more and more people will come to Christ. And I don't have the data in front of me, but a year or two after all this hype, they actually did some research to determine how many people came to faith because of, indirectly or directly, because of this movie. And it was like such a tiny number. It didn't even register.
I think I remember reading the story at the time, and it did not move the needle.
No,
the needle did not. But these folks, okay.
It did make the movie one of the top grossing movies of all time.
It was a top grossing R-rated movie in history at that time. Yeah. So, okay, the campaign has done extensive market research, and that's where you start, and found that while many Americans like Jesus, they are skeptical of his followers. Have you found that to be the case, anyone?
I feel that way sometimes.
That's accurate. The market research split Americans into 4 categories: non-Christians, people who are spiritually open, Jesus followers, and engaged Christians. And it's, I guess, people who describe themselves that way. I'm not sure how they did that.
Wait a minute. What's the difference between a Jesus follower and an engaged Christian?
Exactly. I don't know. But 34% they determined were Jesus followers, and 30% they determined were engaged Christians. And so here's the important thing. There was a wide gap in perception between the first 3 groups and the last category. Most people in the first 3 categories said the behavior of Christians is a barrier to faith. More than 2/3 agreed, said followers of Jesus say one thing, but they do not follow those things in practice. So 2/3 of the first 3 categories felt that Christians' behavior was a barrier to faith. Only 6% of those in the engaged Christian category agreed with that statement.
Okay, so let me get this straight. They diagnose the problem as being that a significant number of Americans are disgusted by the behavior of the church, and therefore aren't open to considering the message of Jesus. So they have, seems to me, 2 options here.
Billboards.
Option 1 is, let's put $100 million to create a media campaign that ignores the sinfulness and hypocrisy of the church and get people to look at Jesus instead.
Yeah.
Or option 2 is to publicly repent and pour energy and prayer into actually reforming the church to look more like Jesus.
Oh, man.
And then they decided that second option seems too hard. Let's do a $100 million ad campaign.
Well, what would you put on the billboards? Repent?
No,
Church?
I'm saying turn the energy toward the church. Like, what we have here is not, Jesus does not have a PR problem. The church has a discipleship problem. And the way you diagnose the problem is going to determine the solution that you prescribe. If you believe it's a PR problem, then advertising is going to work. If it's a discipleship problem, we got other issues.
But Sky, we are good as a culture at making ad campaigns. We are terrible at discipleship. So we have to play to our strengths. Caitlin, what do you think?
Okay, I completely agree with Sky about the strange response of the real problem is hypocrisy, so we're going to just clean up the image instead of dealing with the real problem. The other more concerning thing to me in terms of what this campaign does, because I don't think it fixes the problem, but I also think it does something harmful. And I imagine the people who did this have very good intentions. I was once driving down a road in the middle of nowhere and saw a kind of cheesy Christian ad, and I was with some friends, and so we called the number on the billboard just thinking it was funny. And the person on the other line was a very committed Christian who sincerely wanted to pray for us. And so I don't want to make fun of this genuine effort. I do think one of the really significant problems with this that I see, besides not addressing the real problem, is you've taken this model of marketing and you've taken it from a very different context than the context of ministry in the church. And without really changing it or evaluating it at all, you've just sort of put it into the context of Christian evangelism and discipleship as if nothing needed to change about it. Most of the time, when people have massive $100 million ad campaigns with billboards and all of the kind of the video clips and all of that, what they are wanting is for someone to consume a product, and you can't get rid of that orientation to what you have created just by changing the content of it. Changing it from advertising a new pair of headphones or a bag of potato chips to Jesus doesn't change the fact that what you have done is just given people a product to consume. And that's actually really damaging to the faith, both for us to describe it that way, to describe it as something that's just something for you to consume, that's for your own pleasure and comfort, doesn't require anything of you, doesn't obligate you to anything. Ironically, that orientation to the faith, that it's about what it gets me and not what I am obligated towards, is a lot of what produces the hypocrisy in the church that the ad campaign is intended to address. So we can't just take whatever tools are available to us and not change them at all, and then think that we will produce good results. We're going to produce the results that those tools were intended to produce, which in this case is the very low buy-in of someone who sees an ad and purchases a product, not someone who has a confrontation with the resurrected Christ and has a changed life afterwards and serves the most vulnerable and poor among them, that lives the kind of life that would belie this claim of hypocrisy. That's not what you produce with this. And I'm sure some really good things could come out of it, but the medium is the message. Like the way that you portray the witness of the church, the way that you portray the gospel is going to in some way change the message itself.
Caitlin, that was such a perfectly articulated reason people should buy my first book, The Divine Commodity, which at this point is so old it's virtually a classic. But you articulated beautifully the problem with intersecting Christianity with consumerism. Thank you.
I am so old, I am virtually a classic. So far, they say 100 million people have been exposed to the campaigns, and about 30,000 have signed up for Bible reading plans. So the product is a Bible reading plan. So that is better.
No.
Right?
Can I take this one? Can I take this one, please?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I actually think there's good in this. I think and it kind of parallels my own experience as like a college student. You know, there is obviously the church has a lot of problems in America right now, and it is great that people are engaging the Gospels and discovering who Jesus is directly. When I was a young adult and I was reading the Gospels and I was really drawn to the message there and I was very attracted to Jesus, the biggest barrier for me in my embryonic faith was other Christians. It was the community of Christians that I was seeing around me and in the world that I was like, I don't want to be any part of that. But I was attracted to Jesus. So my question is for this campaign, if they're successful and hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people perhaps do begin to engage with this Jesus of the Bible and they're genuinely attracted to him, what are they going to do then? Because those people need a community. They need church. They need a body of believers to cultivate their faith and live it out. But if the church itself is so toxic and broken that it can't, it's like adopting a child into a completely dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
You know, that's my question is if you don't have a church that's reforming itself and making healthy disciples, what are you going to do with all these new people that come in because they're looking for Jesus?
Yeah, it does seem like to help Jesus, we've decided we have to give up on the church.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And we'll make what? just little individual Bible readers.
That's what so much of this, like so much of the hypocrisy of the church. Yes, sometimes it is hierarchy, sometimes it is institution. But in evangelical America, what often has caused hypocrisy is our belief that every individual person to just sit down with their Bible, they'll understand how to, understand how to interpret it, understand how to live their lives. And so you can just kind of go do whatever you want after that. And so you end up with people not only who don't have a community to be in, as Sky described, but there's some sense in which at least the versions of this campaign that I have seen could end up unintentionally communicating to people, not only you don't need a church, and we understand why you don't like the church, but maybe the church is in opposition to Jesus. And so you should kind of do your own thing. Like you should sit alone with the gospel and figure out how to live your life. And we've seen what happens when someone builds a church on that or someone lives a life like that. And yes, it could go really well. You could be the crusader who says to the church, hey, I've read the gospels and you're not acting like Jesus said. You also could be the person that sits down with a Bible by yourself, decides you're going to come up with a new version of this and fix all the problems, and end up really deeply hurting people because you didn't have accountability, you didn't have community, you didn't have an institution that could slow down whatever you were doing or maybe ask questions along the way or maybe provide some guidance. And it feels dangerous to me, not only that it doesn't provide this on-ramp to the church, and I think they've tried to, at least the things I've read have seen, they want to connect churches to people who are searching. But I don't love the way that it unintentionally communicates that you not only can, but maybe should have your faith exist separate from the church.
Yeah.
Here's another. I mean, I'm not against this campaign. I share the concerns that Caitlin's expressing here. But let's imagine a world, or at least in America, where this campaign is wildly successful. Let's say, like I said, millions of people actually get their nose in the Gospels and begin reading about this Jesus and what he commanded and the way he lived, his compassion and all these other things. And they're genuinely shocked and drawn toward the beauty and grace that they find there.
And then they run into their local church and they reform it.
Well, I'm thinking where it could backfire is, the white evangelical church in America does have a significant problem. Do you think that's going to get better or worse if more secular people actually read the words of Jesus? Do you think they're going to look at the evangelical church and go, oh, we've been misunderstanding you all these years and you're actually great? Or do you think they're going to look at the words of Jesus and go, oh, wait a minute, things are actually worse than we thought because you're really not doing what this guy said?
Yeah, and that would be a bracing impact for the evangelical church, and maybe that's what turns the church around. It's 1 million people on Super Bowl Sunday, then walking to their church and protesting hypocrisy.
Well, it could. I mean, that's happened before. When the Protestant Reformation took off, there was a counter-Reformation in the Roman Catholic Church led by Ignatius Loyola and others what the Protestant Reformation uncovered was a lot of hypocrisy and toxicity and corruption in the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. And part of the response to that was, we do need to get our act together. We do need to clean things up. And the Counter-Reformation was that within the Catholic Church. So maybe there is a revival and people do come to faith through this campaign. And maybe it happens outside the boundaries of the evangelical church and it forces the church to look at itself and go, we do need to change. That would be a remarkable outcome.
Yeah. What if all of them, like 2 million people, just all become United Methodists? And we say, wait, what happened? What happened? That'd be interesting. Okay, Caitlin, yes.
Can I just add one more thing? I do think the other problem with this, and I hope Sky's right. Like, I hope by some working of the Spirit, God could use whatever, even our very fallen and corrupted efforts sometimes to do really amazing things. I hope that happens. What I have seen a lot of from people who are tangentially related from the church who have heard about this is the frustration that it reflects, as Sky has already described, more of an interest in reforming the image of the church than doing what the church is supposed to do. So you found people who got together $100 million. The amount of problems in the world and in our country that could at least be addressed in some way financially by $100 million is significant. And on one hand, yes, you want people to come to Christ and you think that's very important. But I fear that people who don't just see the billboards, but who hear a press release about it or who see an article about it, it confirms what they believe, which is that the church is more concerned with image than with serving the most vulnerable. And I do think we need to do a better job, even within our individual church. It's easy to harp on this big, wild example. And every headline I saw about it said $100 million, because most people, that's just a wild amount of money. In our own churches, I think we should reflect as well on where our priorities are shown through our budgets in terms of how much money do we put into our image versus how much money do we put into serving the most vulnerable. And I think this, at the very least, should be the backlash to it that I at least have seen from people in the church or people related to the church or who've left the church, should be a word to all of us, even if it's not $100 million, to say, do we seem more financially or in other ways invested in protecting our own image? Or, as Sky said at the beginning, actually doing something about it, not because we care about the image, but because we care about being faithful. And faithfulness will require something different of us than maintaining our image.
Oh, man, you're thinking too clearly. You have to keep in mind that $100 million sounds like a massive amount of money. It's less than the typical ad spend for a Pixar movie. So the impact, think about, when a Pixar movie comes out, does the whole country whoa, let's change our lives because we've all been exposed to a $120 million ad campaign? It's like, no. It's like, oh, yeah, I think I saw an ad for that. So that's what this is going to do. It's about the impact of the ad campaign for The Good Dinosaur. As opposed to, man, you know how much kids' discipleship materials could be produced by creative
or school lunches
or school lunches.
So what you're saying is they're not spending enough.
I'm not saying they're spending it in a low impact way that sounds high impact because it's kind of sexy and because it's a lot of zeros, but it's so hard to do an ad buy that actually impacts America anymore because we're so divided. And ultimately, this is my last thought on this, and then we're going to move on. It seems like every generation, there is a concerted effort to make Jesus appear more cool. Starting with the Billy Sunday and, the macho sports guy Christian and all the way, and then the suburban dad Christian of Jesus, of Billy Graham, and then all the way up. Now we've got the black and white dinner party billboard Jesus. And that's why I didn't make Jesus a vegetable in VeggieTales, because I know how cool vegetables are, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want kids to like Jesus just because I made him a really hip, cool vegetable.
I thought you did it because your mom forbid it.
And that.
Right.
Both and.
You forget people have the internet, Phil. They can look up why you didn't make Jesus into a vegetable.
You took improv classes, Sky. Yes, and.
Yes, and. There you go.
Also that. Okay, I got this article. My brother, who does a lot of reading on higher ed because he's the president of a university right now, the 5 emerging factions in evangelical higher education. This was on a blog on Patheos written by Daniel K. Williams. And I thought it was interesting, not because we're such keen followers of evangelical higher education, although it is
for yourself.
An interesting topic, and some of us probably are. Although you're not getting an evangelical higher education right now.
No, but I would like to be hired by an evangelical higher education institution.
Okay. So then this article is totally for you. Did you have time to read this?
I did, yeah.
Okay, this is totally for you. So what it's proposing is that going forward, there could be 5 distinct kind of factions within evangelical colleges that they're going to have to fit into, and they're going to be very distinct, and it's going to make the audience for each one of them, particularly the donor audience, very specific and smaller. So, okay, you ready?
Can I,
Sky?
hold on.
I haven't even started yet.
I know, but I have to ask this clarifying question because I didn't read the article. I apologize. Is the argument that these are new factions that did not previously exist within Christian colleges, that they were more or less united and now these fissures have opened up?
Not really. But
developing.
Yeah, they're developing factions, and that there's always been a spectrum of, conservative to more progressive in evangelical colleges. But this is a little bit different. Just let me run through the 5 for you, okay?
Okay.
And then you can tell me, I'm sure you'll tell me what you think afterwards. I have no doubt that you'll both tell me what you think. Okay. And this is kind of from conservative to liberal, but in a slightly different way. Faction 1, conservative culture warriors. The most politically conservative evangelical faction to emerge from this split will be the culture warriors. Staunchly opposed to critical race theory, feminism, so-called socialism, culture warrior colleges and universities see their Christian mission primarily in terms of training a new generation of Christians to resist cultural liberalism. So some of these institutions would be like Liberty University and Patrick Henry College have developed close relationships with the Republican Party. Okay? They teach classes like Liberty University, the history department, teaches classes about 2 presidents. Do you know which 2 presidents? You can
Wait a
take
minute.
a whole
They only
class
teach about 2 presidents?
No, they
I
have
took
classes.
one of those.
They have a class devoted to each of
got
2
it.
presidents. Do you know who they are? Yes,
I know
Sky.
Reagan is one of them.
Hey, you know that because you took it.
I finally know something.
You sneak. What's the other one, Sky Jatani?
If it's Trump,
Ronald
I'm gonna
Reagan
be
and
really disappointed.
Andrew Jackson.
Oh,
Ronald Reagan and Andrew Jackson, the 2 presidents that are celebrated. There are no classes in the history department at Liberty University about the civil rights movement, African-American history, the history of American women, or any aspect of
There is
gender.
a lot of Civil War stuff.
Seriously?
did you take any of those classes?
So much. I had to.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was
You
the
had
point
to?
of view?
I was a history
War-
major.
Civil War is required. Oh, you were a history major. Okay.
Yeah.
But what was their point of view on it?
It wasn't singular. I had some professors who were a little bit different, but there was quite a bit. I mean, they had a big history conference every year that was pretty much the South will rise again.
I had a few professors that were a little bit different as well at my Bible college. So faction 1 is conservative culture warriors that are really identifying with the Republican Party and kind of hyper-conservative issues. Faction 2, colorblind but anti-nationalist conservatives. Like the culture warriors, institutions and individual academics who fall into this category are deeply concerned about the perceived moral decline of the United States. And they're also generally politically conservative and committed to free market principles, but they don't want to make their institutions adjuncts of the Republican Party. They put Grove City College into this category that was in the news for, the big protest of CRT and Jamar Tisby speaking on campus. So this week's college conference at Grove City College is on the limits of government. Mm-hmm. And instead of Jamar Tisby, when they learned their lesson about that, it will feature an African-American Republican who is described on the conference announcement as a civil rights advocate who is promoting equality through free market solutions. Okay. Evangelicals who fall into faction 2 profess a genuine concern for racial justice, but they define it in individualistic terms and often deny the existence of structural racism, especially when it challenges the principles of the free market. Okay, that's group 2. You with me?
It sounds like you could just
Yeah.
call these folks the free market conservatives.
Yeah, but so you have the Christian nationalists, which would be
Right.
category 1. Free market conservatives would be category 2. He says, evangelical academics who fall into faction 2 are caught in a bind. They're often critical of Christian nationalism in general, which separates them from evangelicals in faction 1. But at the same time, their strong opposition to the sexual revolution and their general belief in limited government and the free market makes them wary of joining evangelicals to their left. So they're in a pretty narrow slice of acceptability in terms of who you can partner with. Okay, faction 3, racially progressive complementarians. Theologically conservative evangelicals that are committed to fighting against structural racism, but are also biblical inerrantists and complementarian on gender roles, make up faction 3. This view attracts a relatively small percentage of the evangelical population in the United States, but it has an outside influence in the conservative Reformed world, especially in denominations such as the Presbyterian Church in America. So some PCA schools would fall into this category. If faction 3 evangelicals find themselves in some tension with other evangelical scholars outside their faction, they experience even greater strains with the American evangelical church at large because of their embracing of some belief in the continued structural racism. Okay, and calling the church to repentance on racial issues. Faction 4 are gender egalitarians. Some gender egalitarians in Faction 4 would prefer to maintain good relationships with evangelicals in Faction 3 and not make gender egalitarianism a first-order principle of justice in the way that racial justice is. And he holds up Wheaton College as an example of that in its statement about teaching and gender roles, where they are egalitarian, but they don't require it among faculty and students. No, Fuller goes further.
Oh, okay. You haven't got
Fuller
it yet.
goes further and has he says a more unequivocal stance in favor of gender equality. With the Fuller statement says, under no condition may the authority of the classroom be used to challenge the calling of any student on the basis of their gender. So you'll get fired if you tell a female student she can't be a pastor at Fuller, but apparently not at Wheaton. Okay, and then, so that's Faction 4. Faction 5 are LGBTQ advocates. Within the last few years, some academics who once self-identified as evangelicals have publicly announced that they endorse same-sex marriage and the full inclusion of LGBTQ people in church ministry without requiring that they remain celibate. This is a fairly small trend at this point, but at several universities, faculty have been at the forefront of calls to liberalize official statements about LGBTQ issues. Right now, it's still theoretically possible for a history faculty member with Reformed beliefs to move from Calvin College to Calvin University to Wheaton College, and then to Covenant College, which is a very conservative PCA school. But in the future, that will probably no longer be possible. Those are the 5. Let me go over them again. Starts with, okay, and think about this in terms of the culture at large and the church at large, because it's not just about the colleges, although we're seeing the tension rise there in pretty big ways. Faction 1, culture warriors, conservative culture warriors. Faction 2, colorblind but anti-nationalist conservatives. So no structural racism, but Christian nationalism is not our cup of tea, and we should not be beholden to just one political party. Faction 3, racially progressive complementarians, a fairly small group, largely in the PCA. Number 4, egalitarians, gender egalitarians, Wheaton College, Fuller Seminary, etc. Faction 5, all the way LGBTQ advocates, and not many of those currently in the evangelical world, but they're predicting there will be more in the future. What do you think about that, Sky Jitani?
I think it's interesting that most of the division is over questions of gender, sexuality, and race. That those seem to be the dividing lines. And
we used to divide over our view of the Bible.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Our eschatology.
Exactly. These are mostly cultural issues, not historic or theological. I mean, there's always a theological element to these things, but it's not the stuff that churches have divided over typically in the past, or that Christians have fought over in the past. I mean, they're not. They're not. I know they're not the deity of Jesus. They're not the resurrection.
But I'm thinking of denominations that split in the Civil War era and then into the Civil Rights era that were often over, like the dividing thing was a question of race.
Yeah,
that's true. That's true. She's got a good point there, Sky Jitani.
It is a good point. But I'm thinking since the Civil War, post, antebellum America, whatever, the modernist fundamentalists debate, all that, it was mostly around what is the gospel, what is the authority of the Bible, supernaturalism, those kinds of stuff. We are definitely in a new era where we can agree on all of the creedal doctrines of the church, and yet you have a different view about women, or a different view about LGBT stuff, or a different view about whether racism is an individual problem or a systemic problem.
Yep. We've dividing us. We've got, where are you on CRT? Where are you on women in the pulpit? And where are you on accepting LGBTQ folks into the church? And those 3 things, if you'll have to dial them in different configurations, will result in a different congregation or a different faculty or a different donor base. And all these students are going to, U.S. News and World Report is going to have to rate Christian schools and put them into little boxes. And so you don't send your kid to the, quote, wrong one.
Based on those 5 categories, though, it seems like it would be the easiest categories to live in or abide in would be 1 and 5. because it's really simple. In 1 in 5, it's you know you are
everything goes or nothing goes.
Exactly, and it's the 2, 3, and 4 groups where it's like there's a lot of nuance here and carefulness, and we can still disagree. But I wonder how many people are going to be pushed more and more and more in the next 10 or 20 years into 1 or 5, and the middle ground is going to continually melt away.
Yeah. Well, and especially because people that are currently in 1 and part of 2, maybe, are always saying, if we give up on any of these issues, we're going to slide all the way.
Right. We'll be at 5.
The slippery slope argument is so strong that if you change your view on women, you're going to change your view on everything else. If you change your view on CRT, you're going to change your view on everything else. So there's a lot of pressure, to go to the polls. That could make us polarized.
If you find yourself in groups 2, 3, or 4, and you say to somebody, and somebody says, well, you don't affirm gay marriage, they're going to assume you're in group 1. Or if you're in group 2, 3, or 4, and you say, but I think it's good for women to use their gifts in the church and in the pulpit, they're going to assume you're in group 5. And it's really hard to articulate 2, 3, or 4 in a way that doesn't stereotype you into 1 or 5.
They might make those assumptions on Twitter as well. Okay, it's time for Caitlin to tell us what she thinks.
Well, I do think I want to push back a little bit, as I did before, on Skye's, characterization of this as a new thing. I mean, not that you were totally doing that, but even the fundamentalist modernist controversy is in part a response to the social gospel. And like what ended up, really delineating a lot of different groups and denominations. Yes, there were theological, like more foundational theological questions at stake as well. But what tended to animate people the most was your question on the social gospel, which was not just, are social questions important, but to what extent are they? To what extent are we bringing in the kingdom of God or not? And that related to both women and race as well.
But Caitlin, I agree with you, Caitlin. But the question, what about the social gospel? At its core, it's asking, what is the gospel? And that's not...
I think that's some of the question. I mean, some of this is that too.
Maybe, but it seems like you can have people in all 5 of these categories who would probably sign off on a basic definition of the gospel and yet might consider one another complete heretics because of their views on other issues.
I think the difference between 1 and 5 really is like the line between a political or a social and a theological question would get really blurry between 1 and 5. I think
Probably.
2, 3, and 4, yes, we really are making divisions where really we share a lot and we shouldn't. The other thing I really wanted to say is I spend a lot of time talking to people who are applying to jobs at Christian schools. And the anxiety that they feel over just what you've described of like, is there anywhere that I could be? I don't fit in 1 or 5. And that would be really easy. I've had a lot of people say that they're going into interviews for schools and they're going to a school that maybe feels a little bit too right of them or a little too left of them. And they're going, I know what they want me to say. And I'm just not completely in their camp. I'm not completely in that box. I don't fit all the things. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. And the thing that's so sad about it to me is not just that I have really faithful, wise, incredibly smart friends that are struggling to find jobs, which everyone is for lots of reasons, but with these specific constraints, but also just what a loss it is to Christian institutions that we can't have a wider diversity of perspectives and backgrounds and traditions. I know a lot of places where maybe people are coming from different denominations. There's theological diversity in that sense, but we don't allow any diversity when it comes to questions of gender or when it comes to political questions. And it's a loss for our institutions that we're not able to work well together across difference, knowing that we will always have lines, right? It's not surprising at all to me that a Christian university would say, there are some things that we don't budge on. And I would like to see included in that a sense of racial justice. I think we should have a line that we say, no, you're outside the bounds of what we think faithful Christian witness in this looks like. But we really could have greater diversity in those places. And I think it's a real loss to the students who are there, that they're not getting the kind of education that they could get if we were able to have institutions that had more diversity in them.
Right. And I also feel bad for the institutions because 30 years ago, no one had to answer any of these questions. I mean, other than saying, are you going to train women to be pastors? And most evangelical schools 30 years ago said probably not. But do you believe in structural racism? No one was asking that question. Are you going to integrate LGBTQ folks into the life of the church? No one was asking that question. So these, no one's prepared to wrestle on like a trustee level at a school. This is a nightmare to try to figure all these things out, and then you've got, the students that are coming in tend to be more progressive than, most of the faculty and all of the alumni. So trying to balance what the students want you to stand for, and there are a number of schools that are being sued by their student body over hiring practices, regarding LGBTQ faculty. So this is really messy. Read the article. Right. We'll post it in the show notes. Read it. Let us know what you think. Last thoughts, Sky?
That messiness is why I worry that in the coming years, it's going to be more and more schools gravitating to group 1 or group 5.
Yeah.
And that 2, 3, and 4 are going to shrink. And that's not good.
Yeah.
Caitlin, you agree or disagree?
I do I'm sorry to just keep pushing back a little bit, but even just what you said, Phil, I'm not to Sky. Sorry. No, I'm with you, Sky, on that.
Oh, you push back on me.
But just a little bit to Phil. I mean, I do think 20 or 30 years ago, there were some of these issues that just weren't an issue. But interracial dating or the time at which you had certain faculty that represented different racial backgrounds or ethnicities or socioeconomic, like those kinds of questions, like on one hand, yes, this is different. I think we all feel the tension of it. At the same time, I think we tend to forget that like these questions of identity and community and what is included in the gospel and what isn't have always been really, really hard. And I worry that when we say too often that this is very new, we miss the resources that we could go to in the past, including the resources that would condemn us, the schools that would go, we think we're doing well. Oh, it was only like 40 years ago that we really struggled with whether we should admit Black students. Maybe we should think about how that shapes our university or our school. Maybe we should consider what things we said in the past and how that might continue to shape our culture. And I just worry that it doesn't feel as immediate to us, but it really has not been that long since those kinds of questions were still dividing schools in terms of who they admitted, not just women students, but students of color.
Yeah.
Okay, Caitlin, to piggyback on that, and given your background with history and your knowledge of these things, when those issues did arise 30, 40, 50, whatever many years ago in different places, do you think they were ultimately resolved because of really good biblical inquiry and prayer and meaningful conversation across party lines? Or were those issues ultimately resolved because of money?
Yeah.
In other words, donors and funders and enrollment dictated the solution.
Well, and some of the really powerful voices had to lose some power, or some of the people who were still holding a lot of weight and money in the school had to die. And I wish I could say that I could think of good examples where it was really thoughtful consideration. And I'm sure there are examples. And I can think of even just one I was reading recently of a group of people who left Lane Seminary out of concern for racial justice. And so there have been organic moments where there was thoughtfulness and there was concern. But I do think you have to deal with the institutional dynamics. And the way that you respond to that, I don't think is by saying, oh, nothing ever changes unless the money changes or unless public opinion changes. I think the way that you address that is going, I'm not going to ask if those considerations of public opinion and money are shaping what we're doing. I'm going to assume they are and interrogate in what ways and figure out a different way of operating, because the assumption that we are all coming in with the best of intentions and with biblical backing is an assumption that is not often true enough for us to keep having it.
I would love an example, whether it's a school or some other ministry or institution, that changed a policy because of genuine, deep concern for faithfulness and faced whatever the outcome or consequences were of that. It's just, I know so many other examples where the change happened because of economic pressure. And I mean, the most classic example was Bob Jones University dropping their interracial dating prohibition after George W. Bush spoke there in the 2000 campaign, and all kinds of heat came down because the school didn't allow interracial dating. And they tried to defend themselves for a while, saying this is our biblical, belief and we're sticking to it. And then they ended up caving because of political and financial concerns. So,
we're out of time. I've been trying to wrap it up for like 7 minutes, 8 minutes. And I've been trying to wrap it up, and you guys. I mean, this is a fascinating discussion, but we got to get to the interview, because I interviewed Mike Erre. Me, Phil, interviewed. I do the interview today. I interviewed Mike Erre about culture warring. How does he define culture warring? How do we know when we're doing it? If we're not supposed to do it, what are we supposed to do? Ooh, it's a good conversation. Caitlin's going to love it. And she's going to want to push back, but it's going to be too late. Too late, Caitlin. There's no pushing back on this one. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for supporting us. We have the best audience in the world, especially the Patreon supporters, or a little better. But, I'm not biased. We hope you have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye. The Holy Post podcast is supported by listeners like you. This episode is also supported by Biola University's Talbot School of Theology. Hey, this is Phil. So you want to grow in your faith and in your ministry. You don't want to repeat the mistakes you see in so much cultural Christianity, so you think you might need a stronger foundation in what the Bible actually teaches. And you're beginning to suspect it isn't going to come solely from YouTube videos and podcasts. Nothing against YouTube videos or podcasts, but If this sounds like you should take a look at Biola University Talbot School of Theology's online programs. Talbot is a nationally recognized seminary committed to Christian doctrinal faithfulness and to the emotional and spiritual health of its students. Through Talbot's online programs, you'll receive personalized instruction and mentorship from nationally respected professors. Both live class sessions and pre-recorded lectures help you tailor an education to fit with your schedule. Let the Talbot School of Theology equip you to be the hands and feet of Jesus in your community. Visit biola.edu/Talbot for more information and to apply today. That's biola.edu/TALBOT.
I am so happy about our guest today. Mike Erre is no stranger to the Holy Post. He's been on the show many times, and he's been a friend of mine since college. He's best known to the Holy Post audience as the host of the Voxology podcast, which he started all the way back in 2015 in the early days of podcasting, almost as early as the Holy Post. He is also the teaching pastor of the Journey Church in Franklin, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. Mike is super thoughtful, engages all kinds of cultural, theological, and political ideas through the lens of Jesus and the New Testament, and that is exactly what he does on our show today. In this conversation, Phil talks to Mike about the way he thinks biblically about the culture wars. How would Jesus engage the culture, and what role does the church actually have? Mike has some really important principles and a winsome way of communicating them, and he completely reorients the way we've been taught by our culture and, frankly, a lot of the church to think about culture war issues. I think you'll find this conversation really stimulating, important, and, as I said, reorienting. Here is Mike Erre.
I am here with Michael Lewis Erre.
Yes.
Is that your middle name, Lewis?
Nope, but I'll answer to it for you.
Was I close? Is it 2 syllables?
No, it is Carl.
Carl?
That was my dad's name,
Okay.
grandpa name. Yep, Carl with a C. Just to be clear, we're not Marxists.
Was there
okay?
was there ever any consideration of your first name being Carl by your parents?
Yeah, that was my dad's first name. My dad was Carl Thomas.
Okay.
And he went by Tom, and I am Michael Carl.
Okay.
And I'm grateful for the choice they made.
Yeah, that's a good choice. Yeah, Carl, you say Carl now and everybody wants to buy a cheeseburger.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially if you're a junior.
Yes, boom. That's great minds.
Mike Erre is the co-host of the Voxology podcast. He is a teaching pastor. Is that what your title is? You're a teaching pastor?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
At a church that I don't know the name of, but it's in Tennessee. What's the name of the church?
It is in Tennessee.
Or do you not
Journey?
give out the name? Oh, you do give out the name. Okay.
Well, I mean, if you're asking,
do you
I'll
want
give
people
the
to
name
show up, or do you not want people to show up?
Yes. We want the right kind of people to show up.
Okay.
No, it's Journey Church, and it's outside of Nashville, and it's been we've been there over 2 years now, and it's been fantastic. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
More than 2 years? Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay.
The entire state of California is immigrating
to
Nashville, Tennessee.
But by way of Ohio? That's a little unusual.
That was the pit stop we weren't expecting.
Yeah,
but
okay.
It's amazing how many people we meet every weekend who are coming to there from California. So there you go. Californians, you can stop now.
Yeah,
we're full.
Half of California is going to Nashville and the other half's going to Austin, Texas.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
And there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
Very little of California is coming to West Chicago, Illinois. Very little.
Which is shocking.
It is shocking. The climate is so comparable. the nightlife, the shopping, the dining scene of West Chicago, Illinois.
Well, just the Midwest values.
The values
of winter and gray skies.
Come for the winter,
awesome.
stay for the values.
Yes.
That's what the billboard says on the edge of town. Mike, we have to talk about something. We can't just...
Okay.
We can't
no
just
witty banter.
jabber.
We
can't just jabber. We have to talk about something. You on your show, the Voxology podcast, which I highly recommend to all of our listeners out there.
You're very kind.
Tim Stafford and your delightful son, Seth, had a theme going for I don't know how many weeks, like 40, 50 weeks, it seemed, a theme going of culture war.
Yes.
And should Christians engage in it?
Yes.
And I was listening and, because the conversation was spread out over so many episodes.
I know.
It was hard to really condense it down.
Yes.
Into a digestible nugget of goodness.
That's right. That's
nougaty goodness.
Because what happens is it's impossible to have good thoughts all at once. So there has to be some marinating that goes on. So usually there's a couple of good sentences out of an hour of content, and then next week there'll be a couple more.
Right. Either that or you could actually prepare in advance and put all the nuggets together.
Sometimes we do that.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do that.
I'm aware of that. I'm aware.
Yeah.
So first of all, okay, because I'm afraid, like cancel culture. Cancel culture is something that your side never does and the other side always does.
Always.
Your side is just being stewards of the truth.
Yeah.
And giving people deserved consequences for bad behavior. The other side is always canceling. And so part of me, is afraid that I might end up using culture wars the same way. Like
that's good.
If I disagree with you, you're culture warring. But if you are out there fighting for an issue that I like,
I love that, Phil.
Well, that's just good, noble,
fighting for
Jesus.
justice. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
So here's a big question.
That's so good, man.
Here's a big question for Mike Erre.
Yep.
How do you define culture wars and culture warring? And have you really sat down and tried to do that?
Yes. Yes, I have. And I ended up channeling people much smarter than me.
Okay.
But for me, the issue of culture war doesn't start with the definition. It starts with what is the role of the church in the world.
Okay. Yes, that's a good place to start. And
depending on how you answer that question, culture war can take on different connotations.
Ooh, this is going to be good. Okay, so, help us out.
You sound surprised that it's going to be good, Phil. So I appreciate that vote of confidence. Now, is the role of the church to transform society, or is the role of the church to itself be transformed into the image of Jesus? And what I want to suggest is that it is clearly the latter that's taught in the New Testament. Because I grew up like you in evangelical culture that said the role of the church is to evangelize and transform the world that way. Yeah. And to express cultural power so that we hold on to our Christian heritage. And that cultural power can be in media, arts, but now it's almost exclusively in politics, the imagination that we have these days.
That's where the power is.
Yes. And what I want to suggest is that Paul's understanding of the church is entirely opposite of that idea, and that the commands of the Bible are not meant to be given to the world, to those who don't agree with the whole Jesus thing to begin with, but rather, as Paul says, who am I to judge those outside the church? I judge those inside. And so there are 59, and I want to read them all, Phil. I want to read them. Okay. I have them pulled up.
Oh,
but
good.
I'm not going to until you say read them.
I'll go to the bathroom. It's a great opportunity for me to go to the bathroom.
There are 59 one another statements that Paul makes about the role of the church is to be transformed in community rather than be the agent of transformation for everybody else. So what we've done with our Bibles is we've made our Bibles, the primary focus of our Bibles is on the world out there or the culture out there. Paul says the primary purpose of his letters, and I see this in other letters too in the rest of the New Testament, is that the church itself might be transformed rather than the agent of transformation of anybody else. So I want to start by saying I don't think there's a lot of ground biblically to stand on unless you go to the Old Testament and argue from Israel, which I don't think you can hermeneutically do. But from the old,
what if you go all the way back to Genesis and argue from the creation covenant, to go and make the earth peaceful and flourishing and et cetera, and righteous.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely.
The earth, the whole earth.
Yes. And notice the words that are used there. The rule and subdue words that are used in Genesis 1, and then the garden words in Genesis 2, those words are actually priestly words. The work it and take care of the garden are priestly words used in Numbers. The rule and subdue words are actually serving words. They're not standing over creation, but they're actually coming under creation to bring out its potential in ways that honor God and for the mutual beneficial flourishing of all.
How can rule and subdue be serving words?
Well, if you look at the etymology, like later.
So are we misinterpreting them? Are we mistranslating them to say rule and subdue? Should there be different?
No. Those are fine translations.
Okay.
But it's how they get applied in 21st century America. When we hear rule and subdue, we automatically assume that's standing over something.
Yeah.
And the image
means
that
I'm in charge. It means I'm in charge.
Right. And
people are fanning me and feeding me grapes.
Right. And that is exactly the image that the words used to describe the role of the human, image and likeness, are meant to contradict. So image and likeness means we're not in charge. We're representatives of what it is that we're imaging. And as representatives of what we're imaging, we don't have the power ourselves or sovereignty ourselves to stand over, but rather we are ambassadors of a sovereignty that's greater than ours. Wow. So even built into, so the rule and subdue is tied into the image and likeness. And the image and likeness has to do with the idea that we have been delegated authority, but it's only delegated authority, and that delegated authority expresses itself in alignment with the aims and character of the Creator.
Okay.
So we're property managers rather than owners.
Mike.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we've been deputized. We've been deputized by the sheriff. So as representatives of the sheriff, we can catch evildoers and put them in jail. Sure.
And Paul makes allowance for the governments of the world to do that.
Okay.
But it is a far cry from a text in Genesis 1 and 2 that's very vague and has to do with human identity.
Yeah.
To reading the New Testament to be validating and stamping and baptizing the idea that the job of Christians is to turn the whole world Christian. And I know there are tons of people who will disagree with this.
Yeah.
The problem is I just don't think they have much of a New Testament foot to stand on.
Okay. Make disciples of the nations.
Right. Well, that's different than making nations disciples. Right. So to make disciples of the nations is to say, yeah, and I firmly agree with this. I actually think there is something marvelous and fulfilling about following Jesus, and it is the best way to be human. I would highly recommend it. But Jesus narrows the ways in which we are to convey that message so as to exclude the expressions of cultural power that so often the church gets tempted into using.
Okay.
So when you look at how Jesus invited people to be Christian, there was no guilt, there was no shame, there was no coercion, there was no manipulation. There was simply love, service, and invitation, right? Humility, he would listen, he was curious. I mean, all of these incredible new creation kind of postures about hospitality and welcoming the other and loving the sinner before the sinner repents. All of that is available to us in order to present Jesus to the world. Absolutely. What's not presented to us are the very temptations that Jesus himself resisted. Coercion, manipulation, testing of God, right? All of that, the abuse of Scripture, all of that is off the table for us. And so all this energy that gets stirred up politically is particularly on the negative side. The animosity, the antagonism, the labeling, the judging, all of that is in direct contradiction to the way of Jesus. So we are called and invited into living lives that invite the nations into the worship of the one true God. But we're not allowed to set aside the commands of Jesus in order to do that, specifically around the loving of enemy, blessing those who persecute you, honoring the imago Dei and the other, and so on. So somehow we have gotten it in our heads that the agenda of Jesus is more important than manifesting the fruit of Jesus' Spirit. And so we think it's perfectly acceptable to cease acting Christian in order to accomplish Christian goals. And so we just want to say this: if it acts like Jesus, it's Christian, and if it doesn't, it's not. It doesn't matter what it calls itself.
Okay.
And the definitive way Jesus acts is manifested in his crucifixion.
No,
right, Paul?
No, it's manifested in flipping over tables and calling the Pharisees nasty names.
Which is so interesting, because what is Jesus doing there? Jesus is cleaning his own house, not the house of the Romans, which is fascinating. He only engaged very, very superficially with Herod. He called Herod a fox. When he deals with Pilate, he acknowledges that Pilate has power, but that power was only given to him from his Father. And that if Jesus were representing a similar kingdom, his followers would fight, as all kingdoms of the world do. But his kingdom is of and from somewhere else, and so his followers do not fight. In other words, the most distinguishing characteristic of the followers of Jesus is that they're not fighting when their kingdom seems to be threatened. And so the posture, when you ask about culture warring, when a church looks out at the world from a place of fear and anger and threat, we've ceased seeing the world the way the New Testament invites us into. Even in Revelation, where there is persecution that is literally happening, the predominant image is of a lamb that was slain and followers who were martyrs. And so that's the lamb. The conquering king is the lamb who was sacrificed. And then the army of God is the army of martyrs who would rather have died than kill their enemies.
And Revelation is where we get our revenge?
No, that's a total misunderstanding, because even in Revelation 19, the most graphic image of Jesus coming in a white horse with a sword in his mouth, his robe, even before the battle, is already bloodied. And we've been trained all throughout the book to see that any blood that is associated with Jesus is always his own and not the blood of his enemy. So even there, Jesus conquers by the sacrifice of himself and the manifestation of the truth that he is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So the entire New Testament invitation, and again, loads of people will disagree with this. Great. I would love to see a sustained exegetical argument from the New Testament that says the role of the church is to be the agent of transformation for society, rather than itself be transformed into the image of Jesus, thereby providing a counterculture of life in a culture, that manifests the worship of death.
Okay. I'm going to pick a couple of specific people from history.
Yes.
And you have to tell me if they were culture warring or not. Was William Wilberforce culture warring when he was trying to convince the Parliament to outlaw the slave trade?
Did he use force?
He tried to use political power or influence. Political influence? Is it?
Yeah. Did he demonize his enemies?
I don't know. I haven't read all.
I don't know either.
I don't know either. Yeah.
So it's possible to be politically engaged in a way that is cruciform and Christ-like, and then it's possible to be politically engaged in a way that sees that the gospel's under threat, as if the gospel could be under threat.
Yeah.
And that we have to fight and take back something. So the issue isn't what do you think about specific policies or whether or not you're politically agitating towards some end.
Yeah.
The issue is, what is the fundamental role of the church in the world? And so when I think about politics in the New Testament, through the New Testament lens, I'm not thinking of the world out there. I'm thinking of the political entity that is called the kingdom of God, of which I am now an ambassador. And that kingdom does not operate on the conservative, progressive spectrum that all of these discussions come out of. It rather calls that whole spectrum into question. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. So what is your posture toward people that are propagating evil against their fellow image bearers?
Yes. Oh, that's fantastic. They are to be called out. They are to be resisted. They are to be loved and served and prayed for and blessed. But absolutely, we're to provide a counter narrative and a counter community.
Okay.
To demonstrate. See, what Jesus did, it was so magnificent. He didn't just critique stuff. He created the alternative. And so much of our imagination politically is designed or is discipled into critique that we've ceased creating or spending as much energy in creating the beautiful alternative. So it's
so much easier to have a podcast where you criticize what's wrong with the world than to actually try to create a new body of believers to practice it right.
That's it. And Phil, that's so brilliant. And it's true, not just with politics, but with even Christianity. There are so many deconstructing podcasts out there, but that have no vision for what comes after. And so the reason I love being a podcaster and a pastor is that I need both. Right. The podcast space gives me room in community and with all of these people from all over the world to listen, to learn, to be curious, to express things, to repent of things that I've expressed. But the church is the place where the vast majority of my creative energy is directed to create the alternative. And we are in Tennessee. It is an incredibly red state. And we are trying to cultivate a community where people who think Biden is the Antichrist and people who think Trump is the Antichrist can coexist together. And that is so much harder than just sitting here taking shots at the other side, right?
That's crazy talk, Mike.
It is crazy talk.
Crazy.
Absolutely.
You're wasting your time. Just podcast and find the audience that agrees with you, and then you can keep reaffirming how much they agree with you.
Yes, and that's how we do church, right? What I'm realizing, like we had this pretty heavy conversation around homosexuality several weeks, a couple of months ago. And one of the things that you notice in conversations like that is that people aren't coming to church to have their assumptions interrogated by the text.
Yeah. People
are coming to have their assumptions validated. And I'm the same way. I'm guilty of the same thing. So I'm not casting stones at anybody but me. But what good teaching should do is to open us up to the possibility that the discipleship we've received by culture, media, friends, whatever, isn't quite as beautiful as what the gospel may suggest as an alternative. And so sitting in both spaces where there's a critique space, and there needs to be, there's so much ugliness going on in the name of Jesus. But there also needs to be a space where the alternative we're working on embodying the alternative.
Right.
So I'm just suggesting that rather than culture warring, the culture we should be warring for is the culture of the church.
Yeah.
That's the culture war we're fighting. And that's the culture war that Jesus fought. Right, was the vision of Judaism that didn't rely on the political revolution that was coming, or the religious separation into the desert that the Essenes embodied, or the political capitulation that the Sadducees embodied, or the holiness movement of the Pharisees. He embodied a different way of being political that invited Israel back to her true identity, and that was the culture war he fought. But even in fighting that culture war, there were only new creation dynamics employed, right? So how many times does he eat with Pharisees, even as he critiques them, right? How many times is he in sustained dialogue with them, answering and asking questions with the religious authorities, and then ultimately forgiving them, right, as he's being put to death. So I'm all for us to be politically involved, and that there is real injustice and evil in the world that is to be resisted. But the available, I'm still talking, Phil. Okay. Don't take that deep breath.
I'm not.
But the available postures of action that are available to us as Jesus followers are defined by the actions of Jesus himself.
But what if that's not as effective as going nuclear?
That's the argument. That's the argument.
What if that doesn't save my children from drag queen story hour at the library as effectively
that's so good.
as showing up at a school board meeting and flame throwing
and yelling? Yes, Phil, that is the counter. And so I just want to say, read the New Testament. Do you not have to take my word for any of this?
Okay.
The invitation is to be faithful rather than effective, right? Nowhere is the church called to do great things for God, and nowhere are people called to do great things for God. God does great things for God. We're blessed if he invites us into those great things. But Paul directly says to a church, make it your ambition to live a quiet life, be at peace with everybody, and work with your hands, which in our case means gesturing on a podcast or typing emails. So all that is to say is the American worship of effectiveness and impact and numbers and counting. You can't read the gospel seriously and take any of that at face value, right? Because for Jesus, it's particularly in the book of Mark, the crowds are always a bad thing. They're always a bad thing. The crowds are actually a character in the book of Mark, and they're always negative.
Okay.
And so the idea that if something is crowded, it's good. And we all know this intellectually, right? But we still put out the 12 fastest growing churches
right.
And we're claiming to follow a guy who says, well, if we're counting, let's make sure to count the last one first. I just think it's absurd that we ignore the direct teaching of Jesus in order to remind ourselves of our importance, when what Jesus does is actually invite us into such ruthless self-examination and repentance in our real lives with each other that takes up all the imagination I have. When you read 59 one another's, and they're all about forgiving and carrying each other's burdens and blah, 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 there isn't much room out there for wanting to try to control anybody else. I fall so short in just that way of living in my family.
Yeah.
Right? So when I approach, one last thing, Phil, I know you're breathing.
Okay.
One last thing. When I approach the New Testament, I do not approach the New Testament with anyone else in mind but me. Right? That's the point of the log and the spec.
A very me-centered spirituality. It's all about me.
No. That is all about my repentance and my transformation in community, yes. But I'm not sitting there thinking, okay, so-and-so needs to hear this, or man, this should cause us all to vote this way. What I'm thinking of is, how do I and my community begin to embody what it is that we're invited into? Okay, I'm done, Phil.
Okay. So a book came out in early September called, here's the title, Christian Nationalism, A Biblical Guide for Taking Dominion and Discipling Nations. Okay.
Yes!
Okay, so I'm going to read you just a couple of tweets from the author of the book.
Tweets are so great.
For you to respond to, because tweets are a window into the soul. I think that's in Proverbs. As a man tweets, so goes his soul. Okay, he tweeted. I'm not going to name the author because I don't try to draw attention to people, actual individuals. I draw attention to ideas.
Okay, I like that.
So here's one. 8 out of 10 Republican voters are Christians. This is our party, and we're reclaiming it in the name of Jesus. There is absolutely nothing the GOP establishment can do to stop us.
Wow.
Okay? Is that the way of Jesus, or what do you?
Well, let's examine that for just a second. So one of the beautiful things, there was a book that came out in 2014 by Christian Smith. It was called Evangelicals, Embattled and Thriving. And he, out of a bunch of data, he came to the conclusion that evangelicals thrive and maintain unity and internal group cohesion by having enemies and adversaries. So that we constantly, and you can just go through the list, right? And you have, even in your 500th anniversary song.
Yeah. I tweeted once talking about going from the 1960s to the 2010s, every decade, what we were supposed to be afraid of.
Oh, I love that. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And his further point was that very posture, the internal group cohesion, needs a struggle, is what limits our influence in the greater world. right? So we do a great job of keeping the convinced, but we do a really poor job of convincing anybody else. So when I hear that the word Christian applied to a political party or to a policy decision, I think that is a fundamental violation of anything Jesus like. And not only that, but to equate allegiance, and this is what Al Mohler did, equate allegiance to Jesus with allegiance to a partisan view.
Yeah.
That is the same kind of national idolatry that you see condemned in the book of Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar equates allegiance to him as allegiance to God. And you see this incredible deconstruction of Nebuchadnezzar. That is the same arrogance sitting behind, statements like that.
I see. So you're predicting that the president of the Southern Baptist Seminary is going to go mad,
become a wild animal.
And
Yes,
eat grass. Okay,
yes.
You heard it here first, folks. That's Mike Erre. Okay, does this tweet from the same guy does strike you? Is this any better?
Okay.
Yes, we are Christian nationalists. Yes, we are taking over the Republican Party and the country. Yes, we are indoctrinating the next generation to follow in our footsteps, all for the glory of God. We can't be stopped. Enjoy the show.
Yes.
Would you say way of Jesus, or on a scale of 1 to 10, Jesus is a 10? I don't know what a 1 is.
Yeah, no, I actually really love to read the biblical case for that, because I think there isn't one. In fact, in fact, Jesus would critique that whole way of seeing the church, the world, and Christians in it as something antichrist. So I could not actually think there's anything more blasphemous or damaging in our world than that kind of thinking.
Ooh, okay, good. So, last angle. And, because I'm trying to trip you up. I'm trying to trip you up so that we can, Mike Erre, he's full of it. Yeah,
you got me on Albert Mohler.
He talks a big game. Yeah, he thinks Al Mohler's going to turn into a cow. Oh,
yes,
my gosh, that's going to come back to bite him. Our children, are in danger. Always, people are coming for our children. And I tweeted that because somebody said, "What are you going to do when they come for your kids?" And I said, "Who? Rock and roll?" I actually said that. Is rock and roll coming for my kids again? Who's coming for my kids? And a couple of journalists have now sent me articles like about transgenderism and how, a Virginia state lawmaker was proposing a rule that it's child abuse not to allow gender conforming treatment for a minor. And you could actually have your children removed from your household if they were transgender and you were not allowing them to transition. So Mike, that sounds like people are coming for my kids and that I need to defend my kids by whatever means necessary. So when do I have to abandon the way of Jesus for the sake of others?
That's so good. Yeah, just Phil, I love you.
When, Mike?
Yes, and that's so I live by 3 principles about that rein me in. Around culture war. One is, unless it acts like Jesus, it's not Christian. The second is, it's more important to be faithful than to be effective. And the third one is, there's nothing so urgent we have to get off of our cross to make sure it happens. And that's what you're getting to, the idea that there are things, and evangelism used to be pitched this way, right? The souls are at stake. If you don't tell them, no one's gonna, and they're gonna burn in hell unless you say something. And that justified all sorts of non-Christian behavior around guilt or manipulation or coercion or whatever. Or even, the Southern Baptist Convention, all the abuse was justified by, we don't want to compromise our witness to the nation.
Right.
So that idea that there is some glorious, righteous end out there that we can use any means to achieve is directly contradicted by the words of Jesus, the practice of Jesus, and then the teaching of the rest of the New Testament. Insofar as to say, so I have absolute opinions, not absolute, but I have definite opinions around how my kids should learn sexuality and how that should be taught and practiced. And I think there could be times when strategic withdrawal could be an option. But we've also seen, I just saw a quote from David French where he was quoting a study that was done that said, those who withdraw from school systems are often more likely to find themselves into like sexual minority identifications. And so, well, maybe withdrawal isn't the right answer either. What the New Testament seems to advocate is this joyful, gracious nonconformity that is willing to be persecuted, but does not have a martyr's complex, that simply rests in the fact that God is good and that I'm under no pressure to bring about the righteous ends for everybody else other than for me, right? That I am simply invited to, even those who would be forcing something like that. I mean, so take for me, I have a little boy with Down syndrome, and suppose they made a law that said anybody with Down syndrome has to be aborted in the womb. Now, you bet I would freaking agitate against that. But the range of my behaviors while I'm agitating is constricted by the way of Christ. That's the only point. So even if I'm objecting to having a sexual curriculum that I may or may not agree with being taught to my children, the postures I can take in the political process that we're all invited into are narrowed by the way of Christ.
Okay.
And if I am sitting there thinking that I have to disobey the command of Jesus to love my enemies in order to accomplish what I think the agenda of Jesus is, then I've missed the agenda of Jesus altogether.
Mike, that is so not what I want to hear.
Oh, me too, Phil.
So, okay, let's just sum it up. So how do you define culture warring?
Yes. It is a way of seeing the role of the church in the world that sees the gospel as under threat, and any power over is legitimatized to keep the gospel safe. And it's right, given its rightful place in culture.
Stop. It's getting too long now. Yeah, you needed to stop like 7 words ago.
True.
But that was good. Okay. How do you define, in our attitudes towards culture, how do you define the way of Jesus?
The self-giving enemy love that does not use, this is from Philippians 2, that does not use rights and privileges to be exploited for more, but rather chooses to use rights and privileges to be poured out for the sake of others. That's the Philippians 2. That's cruciformity right there.
Man, sounds kind of communist.
I'm going to change my middle name to Carl with a K.
Yeah, or just kind of communist. Mike, I really appreciate it. You're
awesome.
You're good at summing things up. I like the way you think. So thanks for coming on. Everybody, Mike has a podcast. It's called Voxology. Go look for it wherever you get your podcasts. It's super good and super helpful. It's actually a nice complimentary podcast to the Holy Post, because they get bogged down in less current events and go deeper on some issues.
And we compliment Holy Post. We
appreciate that. And I just complimented you. So what goes around comes. That's the way of Jesus, Mike. That's the way of Jesus.
That's one of the one another's. Kiss like one another.
It's like when we endorse each other's books that we haven't even read. That's the way of Jesus.
Totally.
Okay. You have a great day, Mike. Thanks for being on the show.
I love it. Thank you.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele, and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much more.